It's a difficult sell, I would suspect, Bev, because you're instantly going to have a lot of people comparing those huge dollar sums with the deficits in other areas of spending. We all know that there is a countrywide hospital shortage of staff, shortage of beds. We all know that the NDIS is running short of funding or being oversubscribed at least. So a lot of people will want to know why we can spend these astronomical sounding sums on exotic sounding submarines but not tend to basic community needs.
There's the scale of the price tag. There's also the time frame and the history of submarine building and development in Australia. How do you think this stacks up? It's a far more adventurous proposition.
Yes, it is. It's more adventurous than any of Australia's other recent episodes of a traditional game now in Australia that I like to call fantasy subs. It was 2014 when it was 2009 when the Labor Party first proposed 12 new submarines to replace the Collins class. They were colloquially known as Son of Collins. They were a fantasy. Then we had from Tony Abbott Japanese-built submarines. They turned out to be a fantasy replaced by Malcolm Turnbull's French submarines, which were dumped in turn by Scott Morrison in favour of the AUKUS proposal, which has now been brought to fruition by Anthony Albanese, or at least the plan for which has been brought to fruition. Yet this is absolutely an exotic and long-range plan. For the first decade of this plan, phase one is essentially just more US port visits and then UK port visits from their nuclear-powered and in some cases nuclear-armed submarines through Australia. The second decade is when Australia simply buys between 3 and 5 Virginia-class submarines from the US. It's only when you get into the third decade that Australia and Britain start to bring off the production line, or start to make on the production line, the new so-called SSN AUKUS submarines. They'll be a completely new design based on a British model. They'll be jointly manufactured by the Brits and Australia, and they'll start rolling off the production line in the 2040s. So even then, Australia will not have, and by that point, the existing Collins-class subs will be progressively retired. So even then, Australia will not have a credible number of capable nuclear or any submarines in the water. If you have 3, which is the second decade in this plan, when we have the 3 Virginia-class subs bought from the US, under the rule of 3 on any military deployment, only 1/3 of those can be on active deployment at any one time. 1 is in maintenance, the 3rd is being brought out of maintenance. So even if we have 3 American Virginia-class nuclear-powered submarines, it means only 1 can be deployed at any one time. This is not a credible capability, so it's still a very long way off having a serious capability in the water, Bev.
So then, as a deterrent, which we know this really is for China's aggression in the region, is it the right military deterrent in the age that we are now managing these tensions?
Well, the hard calculus that is not spoken by any of the governments here, Bev, is that it would give Australia the ability to put a submarine, because the nuclear-powered subs can stay underwater for up to 3 months, and they have long range, high speed. They're able to linger off the Chinese coast and directly threaten China with the threat of cruise missile strikes, not nuclear missile. Australia's not seeking nuclear weapons, of course. Australia has no capacity at the moment to put China under direct threat, so that's the logic of this particular acquisition. But the time frame on it means that it's not going to be useful for any near-term crisis. More practical for any near-term crisis is so-called Pillar 2 of AUKUS, and that is the cutting-edge technologies that the 3 countries have committed to developing together. So that includes quantum computing, quantum communications, hypersonic missiles, artificial intelligence. They're more likely to be brought to fruition in the next few years than certainly the submarines.
Yeah, which brings us to this discussion and question mark around the potential loss of sovereignty for Australia with this very close deal with both the US and the UK. Can any nation truly keep its sovereignty while working in any alliance or with an ally?
No, these are questions of degree. You're right. They're not questions of absolutes, because a military alliance is inherently a sharing of sovereignty. Each country contributes something of its sovereignty to improve the combined strength of the two countries together. So that's the essential nature of an alliance. The more tightly that they are dependent on each other, the more each shares some sovereignty of its own with the other. As this AUKUS deal tightens the degree of military dependency of the three countries on each other, it therefore requires more pooling of sovereignty from each. So Australia will become dependent on the Brits, well, initially on the Americans for nuclear reactors and nuclear-powered submarines, and then on the Brits to build the reactors which will be in the so-called SSN AUKUS class submarines. Australia will supply other elements and build and manufacture other elements. It also supplies the geography for a lot of these deployments and basing around the Australian coastline. But all of this, and crewing and all the rest that goes with it, but all of this is some surrender of some sovereignty, including funding, personnel, technology, in the interest of increasing the shared combined sovereignty of, in this case, the three allies together.
Yeah. You know, we've heard quite strong rhetoric, if we want to call it that, at this point from Xi Jinping during the People's Congress. He's now head of the military. Should we be believing that this is going to be a deterrent? Is it going to give China pause for thought with its ambitions?
In itself, the particulars of this submarine deal, no, not really. I don't think the concept of a jointly Australian-British manufactured submarine being delivered from the early 2040s on will deter any Chinese adventurism next year or the year after, no. I think, however, it does indicate a couple of things which complicate China's thinking and any plans it might have for aggression or adventurism. One of those is it's an indicator of shared political will to have the three leaders of the three countries committing to a deal which was first announced by a different British Prime Minister and a different Australian Prime Minister, and that is now being advanced to the next stage by new administrations. This suggests some durability and it suggests some seriousness. I think one of the things that surprised well, just about the entire planet with the Ukraine war and Russia's invasion was the surprising purposefulness and speed with which the West came together, the NATO alliance and others, came together to support Ukraine. And I think the AUKUS alliance gives a pretty strong hint that you would see something similar from those allies in the event of Chinese adventurism in the region. But it also, by combining the research capabilities for those cutting-edge so-called second pillar AUKUS capabilities, does suggest a real potential for outmatched technology against China in those areas of military technology.
Always good to get you on. Thanks, Peter, so much.
Pleasure, Bev.